My name is Victor Nee, and I'm directing the Center for the Study of Economy and Society. And it's a great pleasure today to have Hakan Holm, who's professor of economics at Lund University School of Economics and Management. And he's here as a new fellow of the center and also to participate in a symposium on behavioral experiments in the natural setting. And so today I'm thinking of a conversation between an economist and a sociologist. I'm an economic sociologist. And as in the way of a cross-disciplinary exchange. And so Hakan, I know you are a game theorist, and that this has been an important part of your work as an economist. What is it about game theory that draws your attention as an economist?
Well, I must say that game theory is one of the most general frameworks to understand both, I would say, human conscious behavior and because it involves interaction aspects, and it's extremely general. So I would say that it's but it's also structures thinking about interaction. So I think that is why I was first time I learned about game theory, I was really impressed. So, but then going back to actually the first time I actually used it in research was in my dissertation. So I was doing research. I was actually a little bit unhappy about economics, the development. I believe that assumptions about rationality was somewhat too ambitious, and so my dissertation was about computational complexity in economics, basically, and there actually I used game theory to study this concept. So that was how it started.
Right. Well, game theory is a tool, and what does it enable you to address in the way of important questions that attracts your attention and maintains your attention as a economist?
I would say that most of microeconomic theory, when you have some interaction, you describe it nowadays as a game. But first of all, I must say that I started out with games and game theory. I now do relatively applied studies. But let me take an example. To understand a firm's behavior on a market, today in industrial organization, we describe the behavior of firms, how they set prices, how they choose quantities in terms of typical oligopoly games. So that would be one simple explanation one application of game theory.
Well, you say game theory enables economic analysis of interactions. And that comes close to sociology because we are a discipline that studies social behavior, and that means interactions. Yet it's interesting and in some ways perplexing that the interactional aspect of economic analysis has not moved very far in engaging sociology, which is a discipline that examines stable interactions and changes in networks and social relationships. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's I think the starting point is a little bit different to a certain extent, but I'm not a sociologist, so I would not exactly know,
Right.
and I would not be so good to describe where you depart in your analysis. But my feeling is that we start from somewhat this individual player, especially in what we call non-cooperative game theory. And if you get interaction like cooperation, that is the result of these individual, often utility maximization decisions. So I guess that you can get the same sociology, same phenomena as you have and study in sociology, but we have a different mechanism behind it. So but yeah.
There's something that has intrigued me because my thesis advisor was George Casper Homans, and he was a pioneer in choice theoretic sociology, drawing from behaviorism. But his view was that economic exchange has essentially the same structure and dynamics as social exchange, because both are involved with incentives, rewards, sanctions, and the question of strategic action, as well as action that are non-strategic. And so in the elementary forms of social behavior, he uses game theory throughout the book to examine dyadic exchange and triadic exchange. And then you have James Coleman, the university former professor at University of Chicago, writing a very important book, this Foundations of Social Theory, where he essentially uses the rationality assumption that was in Homans, and Homans' rationality assumption was bounded rationality, very close to Herbert Simon. In fact, Herbert Simon wrote a paper, published it in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, formalizing the model that was that Homans had developed as a formal dynamic of exchange that it was close to an economic model, so there was a lot of traffic, so to speak, intellectual trade between sociology and economics in the earlier period, because remember, Gary Becker ran a interdisciplinary seminar at the University of Chicago. The three of the core members of that seminar were Jim Coleman, William Julius Wilson, the distinguished African-American sociologist, and Ed Lauman, one of the leaders of network analysis. So there was and has been a long tradition of cross-disciplinary exchange and fertilization in the way of ideas. So it is curious that, I mean, I don't think I have an answer to the question why game theory has which has made remarkable advances in the social sciences, has seemingly not been in recent decades as important in sociology as it used to be. I have to confess that a number of my papers use game theory and dynamic game theory, and one of the more recent ones. But I think I'm pretty much on the atypical. I mean, in fact, some of I've heard people say, well, Victor's an economist. But I think I'm very much in the sociological tradition, actually. How about you?
Well, I think that these discussions, I think, are extremely important, and some sociologists would have the view that somehow economists would invade areas of other disciplines. And I guess that Becker was one example to a certain extent, with discrimination. And so, and if we go to Simon's earlier papers, I think it's in the 50s already. I really liked them because I was, as I said, interested in boundary rationality as well. But they are a little bit, they're not taking it all the way through the formalism that normally game theory does. And I think that one difference is that sociologists might use game theoretical arguments, while economists, they go down to the formulas in a different way. And that might be, perhaps we use the same tools, but we use it in a somewhat different way.
No doubt there will be disciplinary differences, otherwise there would be no reason for having distinct disciplines. But I was very pleased that in a paper which I wrote with two co-authors, Dan De La Posta and Sanja Apper, which is going to be published in Rationality and Society as a lead article with commentaries, that Robert Solow read the paper and contributed a very brilliant comment, providing a macro model analog to the micro model that was driving the paper on endogenous institutional change. And so there still is engagement, but of course it has to be different. Every discipline has its disciplinary core, and they stay to that. But let me change the question a bit to ask, what led you as a game theorist to move towards doing lab in the field behavioral experiments? What accounts for this shift from a field that, as game theory, is more formal, as you pointed out, in economics, not focused on data, not focused on findings in the empirical world, but a type of very rigorous theory-driven effort to formalize the strategic exchanges that people have?
Well, and the story is that would be that I started. Actually, I went to US a couple of times to a conference. It was actually public choice meetings, and at that time, 50 years ago or so, or more, 20 years ago, they actually had a joint meeting with the Economic Science Association, where all the experimentalists were, because they were too small at that point in time. So they had joint meetings. And so I started out by going to the theoretical sessions at public choice, but then now and then I ended up in an experimental session, and I really saw that this is something very interesting. And I got interested in it because for instance, I ended up in one session by Vernon Smith, and he did a very interesting presentation where it was so obvious that he had this model before, a clear and a crisp model, that he actually then tested in some sense. So I felt like this is more like checking if what we have done, because the economic theory, there is a lot of mathematics, and at that point of time I felt like it was not much, at least not for me to do. So I was quite taking about these experiments, and so I started to do some laboratory experiments back in Lund, and then there was a study by Ed Glaser and some others in QDAE in the beginning of 2000, and that was about measuring trust. And then I was editor of the Swedish Economic Association together with the co-author Anders Danielsson, and I said to him, they did this study at Harvard with Harvard undergraduate students, And I thought like, okay, this is a pretty specific sample. I want to test this somewhere else if this actually works. So we wanted to take. So I said to Anders, could we go to Africa to do the same thing to check if they're true? And we actually went to Tanzania and we did studies, the same studies in church and among students in Tanzania. So that was, I wanted to check a little bit more the validity of the results that you find in usual lab with
I see. So you were driven by the question of external validity.
Yeah, to a very large extent. That was the reason I went.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about the question involving the quest for external validity. Why is this a concern for experimentalists?
I think that what you do, I think it should be seen as a process that you start out perhaps in the lab, and then you see results and interesting results, for instance, and then I think I've been to so many sessions where common economists would typically ask, but this is students. Does this work more in reality? So I think that is a normal question to ask for any wanting to be more critical about their results to see if it actually holds. So I would not, I would say that this is natural progress of discipline.
There were yesterday at the symposium, which we had on behavioral experiments in a natural setting, and we had economists, and you're the economist, and Frederick Anderson, the economist that's discussant, and two sociologists who were presenting results from field experiments. And a question was asked by Michael Macy about randomization, that he didn't see it in the lab in the field experiments that we have conducted together in the Yangtze Delta region that you designed. Your comment was thoughtful, but what about randomization? Is this missing in the economic experiments that prominent economists take to the field, like Ernst Fehr and many others who have, in your discipline, led the move from laboratory games, incentivized games, to the field setting? Because even in the laboratory, they were not necessarily randomized games. I remember sitting in on a seminar taught by Dick Thaler here at Cornell when he was here, and some of the games that were and experiments that were done by Thaler and other experimentalists, I don't remember emphasizing so much randomization.
I think that is, I mean, the comment about randomization is, I think it's a common way to perhaps define experiments for some parts of the research community. And I would say that some economists as well would probably use the same definition. That I see that it's a relatively narrow definition according to and too narrow. But this is, I mean, the formalism behind this is, I don't think how important it is. But I think that it's good to look at other disciplines to see how to see what I call an experiment. And I mean that when you construct very carefully a study where you test something to identify some kind of causal effect, it could be a causal effect, but it doesn't have to be it. But let me take one example where there is no randomization whatsoever. That is often used in physics, and this is more like a thought experiment, and that was used. I think the historians, they have different views about whether this was actually taking place. But it was this idea by Galileo Galilei, where he had two balls that he dropped of exactly the same size down from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And what he was testing was the law of acceleration of falling bodies. And his prediction was that they should land independently, that the other one was substantially heavier than the first one. Then if they landed at the same time, then it was somewhat proof of the theory of acceleration of masses, so of bodies. So here I would say that would typically be an experiment to me, but there is no randomization whatsoever. You have similar types of experiments where you do wind tunneling experiments with aerodynamic bodies. We also call wind tunneling experiments when you test a new design of a market. For instance, the auctions at the telecom, where you had auctions on spectra for the telecom industry in the beginning of 2000. You started out by doing experiments to see if it worked, not to randomize it. So I think we have.
But let me be the person who does some pushing here, because it seemed to me that the experimental design of the lab in the field experiments that we've been conducting in the Yangtze Delta region is the selection of a random sample of entrepreneurs and then a sample of a control group. And so you look at whether they're similar or different, and with certain controls. Now, that's almost like an analysis of variance. And I think the question that Michael Macy raised, well, yes, I can see that that's useful, but is that randomization as in the specification of experimental design, where you can get to the aspect of causality? Are they different or not? You don't know what the cause would be. You know they're different or they're similar, but like in analysis of variance. So how would you respond to that type of more aggressive questioning?
Okay, when we speak about that experiment, that there is a certain randomization, but it's not the key treatment variable.
Yeah.
So the key treatment variable is if it's a control group or CEOs in this study. And so I don't necessarily call that either an experiment, but we use experimental methods to elicit things that are important. Uh-huh. But I would also be, if we take the example, you mentioned Fair's experiment. Right. So Fair and List has this paper about Colombian CEOs in the coffee industry. Right. And what they do is basically what we do.
Yes.
And they call it an experiment. So it's like, but let me see. Let us just think what we are doing in this.
Okay, good.
But because if we go back to Galileo Galilei, what he did was the important stuff he did was to form this ball exactly the same form and shape, right? Yeah. And what we're trying to do is to form a control group that is very similar to the CEOs. And then we drop these, we construct the games that are filtered through a very thought out process.
Right.
And okay, you don't have to call it an experiment. I call it an experiment, but so I think it's.
No, I'm sympathetic to the broader use of the word experiment. That it is, the basic idea is that you try to rigorously test a hypothesis with some not quasi-experimental effects, but something that comes to whether it's a control group or some type of control over, and that it would be a treatment over the group that you're interested in studying the effect of something on. So I don't really argue with that, but let me move on, and I like your, but it is true that economists and behavioral economists have called research design experiments, which when we're under pressure from reviewers, we relabel incentivized games. But that's part of the game of getting past the reviewers. I think they're experiments, and I'm happy to have that way of thinking about it because it's a deliberate effort to control what you study and measure, to seek findings. So we've been collaborating together for almost a decade now, and it's just been wonderful experience and very, very productive. And your part of the collaboration has been to design the lab in the field experiments. And now we are engaged in the third round of distinct lab in the field experiments. The first was in 2009, the second in 2012, and now there's a very ambitious experiment underway in 2016. What have been our major findings? Have we come up with something new through using this lab in the field experiments, which is enormously expensive because of the massive scale of our efforts, and which we have done with tremendous rigor, actually, when you think about the scale and the expenses involved. What have we found, in your view, that justifies? It's been fun, it's been great, but what have we come up with?
So I think that we have several findings actually, and I think that the first wave we focused on risk taking, and we probably first we introduced this difference between strategic risk taking and risk taking without non-strategic risk taking. And I think that that's an important distinction that actually is not made so often. There we actually find, because there we actually find that there seems to be no big difference between CEOs and other people when it comes to risk taking, but that it concerns non-strategic risk taking. But there is a difference when it comes to strategic risk taking. That is, I think, in a new result that we also have published already. Then we have also done studies on because one of the measures in non-strategic risk taking was trust, and we have been able to connect that measure with other types of processes that actually tells us something about the development of trust among these subjects in an interesting way. So that would be two important results, and we also have what we discussed yesterday, very convincing results of different strategic decision making between CEOs and others, and that this actually goes basically in the unexpected direction, namely that CEOs appear more pro-social in that they cooperate and are less hawkish in the games we study.
Okay, yeah, I think so. But now this leads to the interesting question that you, myself, and Sonia Opper, who's an economist, have been involved in probably the longest and deepest collaboration between economists and sociologists that I know of. It just doesn't normally happen. And we've done this for quite some time with incredible results. I wanted to show you that this book, which Sonia Opper and I wrote, Capitalism Below, has just come out in translation, a Chinese translation by Peking University Press. And Sonia says it's practically a bestseller now in China. So she checks Amazon China. And the dean of the business school at Peking University just invited me to an important panel that he's organizing after reading the book and said, oh yeah, they got it. So we have made progress both at the experimental part and also in the scholarships, and we have collaborative papers. What does this lead you to think about the potential for cross-disciplinary collaboration that we have done based on what we have done as people from distinct disciplines, each of which have imperial ambitions to explain human behavior? Sociologists are the same way as the economists, but we come from it from a different angle, right? The sociologists begin with social relations. Economists begin with the rational individual actor. But both are now examining exchange and interaction and stability of interaction.
Yeah, I guess that we come from different angles.
Yes.
And that I think we can learn quite a lot from each other in these collaborations. I think that for instance, when I read your first version on generalized trust paper, I was somewhat, this is economists typically say, why does trust exist? Why? I mean, it's not in equilibrium normally. So and when I then read that you were, I mean, this was somewhat obvious that there could be some trust, but there were also factors affecting it in a much more elaborate way than we have used to think as economists, I would say. So I have learned a lot from this collaboration. And I think that it's very productive for projects that you have from people from different fields.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now, of course, I could speak in hours about our different results, but I think that when you and Sonia you have the longest
yes.
relationship between the fields. I, so to speak, was invited to join, yes. and when you join something, I had quite a lot of stuff to do then,
yeah.
But I saw this potential directly because I thought this has never been done in this size.
Yeah.
So, and then you have to have the nose to be prepared to work a couple of years before you see.
Yeah.
But I knew that this will be very good.
Yeah. Well, it's a historic study, and it is not often that the opportunity provides social science with being there near to the beginning of a major institutional transformation from one of the least marketized societies in the world, thoroughly organized as a classic state socialist, centrally planned economy with as little market effects as possible, squeezed by the commissars to near death. There were no private firms before 1978. And so we have been able to study the emergence of the economic institutions of a capitalist economy, actually, in the classic sense, using the best tools we have in the social sciences. The great advances made in sociology in the survey instrument, the mixed methods of face-to-face interviews, and then the experiments, lab-in-the-field experiments, and the building of panel data. So this has been a very enjoyable experience. Again, you're right. Sonia Opper and I have been working together now for 14 years. It's a long collaboration. again, but I'd be curious to know what, in your assessment, could we do better in the way of this type of involvement of sociologists and economic sociologists who respects the choice theoretic approach of economics, and a game theorist who has shifted to empirics of lab in the field experiments. What can we do better, in your view?
Well, that is a tough question, you know, because you of course you can always improve data collection and so on, but this is like you always of course do the best you can.
Right.
So asking, well, and then apart from the trivial improvements like increasing size of subjects, I think that, something that would be a dream to a certain extent for economists would be that we would more have a similar theoretical framework.
Yeah.
So that we could actually speak a little bit more the same language. I think that it could be good for science in certain when there is some anarchy.
Right.
Different theoretical concepts and so on are competing, but at some point it's also very valuable to not speak in parallel. So we, in some sense, we don't understand really what the other one is saying. So.
I so much agree with that view. Again, in the physical and natural sciences, the most exciting areas of research and progress are at the intersections of disciplines. So the field of biophysics, the field of biopharmaceutical science, the field of biochemistry, these are exploding, and with rapid discovery science, with fundamental breakthroughs. In the field of cognitive science is cross-disciplinary. So in my view, the future of the social sciences needs to be challenged by just the question of common behavioral assumptions and common use of mental constructs. Not that we should be merging, but that there is a common language that provides a basis of exchange. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Hakan. This was great to have a chance to talk with you, and that we've had this conversation for so long in so many different places. And now we have it for the Center for the Study of Economy and Society, and we so much welcome you as a fellow of the center and look forward to many years of joint work and engagement in the intellectual community that is actually global, and that's the way it should be, that centers should reach out and build a global community of scholars.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.